Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and this is going to be episode 2 in our series looking at the best characters from every decade in horror. In episode 1 we started with the 1950s, episode 2 we now move into the 1960s. A decade that, I've said it before, I don't think it was the most hard-hitting or iconic decade that there was for horror, but there was a lot of great movies and some really good characters that came along too. So let's get straight into it. In at number 10, we have a character from a movie that, although it's considered a classic horror film and is a favourite for many people, it's one that I just don't enjoy. It doesn't do anything for me. I think it's aged terribly, but I do appreciate a good performance when I see one. So in at number 10, we have Rosemary, played by Mia Farrow, in Rosemary's Baby from 1968. And I give Mia Farrow credit. She plays this really well in what must have been a challenging role, seeing this young woman at the mercy of a devil worshipping cult that live in and around her apartment block that have dark intentions for her and her unborn child. And I particularly like in this film how her plight is represented through her sort of diminishing looks and appearance. So she cuts her hair short, and throughout the film she just gets more and more gaunt looking. It's quite distressing to see. So yeah, she is a great character. You do get behind her and feel for her and her unborn child, and I think Mia Farrow did really well with this demanding role. So in at number 10 we have Rosemary from Rosemary's Baby. In at number 9, we have Melanie Daniels, played by Tippi Hedren in The Birds from 1963. The cheeky, charming, typical Hitchcock blonde that arrives in Bodega Bay just as the area comes under attack from hundreds and hundreds of birds. And Melanie is a fun character, and she's involved in a few iconic scenes in that movie. The bird attack up in the attic, and the terrifyingly tense bird attack in the schoolyard, and she's absolutely fantastic and frighteningly convincing in both of those scenes. And it's kind of hinted at, but Hitchcock never goes there, but there is always a question that's brought up by one of the characters that none of these bird attacks happened until Melanie got to the area. And that always had me wondering, did she have anything to do with it? Was it some supernatural thing that was going on with her? Or was it just coincidence? It might have been addressed in the film, but from what I remember, that theory is quite ambiguous and only hinted at quickly in one scene. But let me know what you think about that. But in at number 9, we have Melanie Daniels from The Birds. In at number 8, we have Gwen Mayfield, played by Joan Fontaine in The Witches from 1966. And Gwen is such a sweetheart of a character. She arrives in this quaint, picturesque British village in the countryside to be the new school teacher. And at first she's welcomed very warmly. Everyone's very nice and hospitable to her. But as the film goes on, we as the audience can just tell that something's not quite right in this village, and it soon appears that dark forces are at work. And Gwen's character slowly starts to cotton on to this throughout the film, and she is sort of thrust into this murky world of witchcraft and the occult. But what I love about Gwen and Joan Fontaine's portrayal in this is she's just such a soft, sweet character. She's only ever out to look out for the children and to protect them and the people that are around her, and she just has a really nice innocence about her, and boy do you root for her in this film. You don't want to see any harm come to her, which is unusual for a horror film. But The Witches is a film that it's as quaint as the village that it's set in. It's a Hammer film that goes under the radar a little bit, and you can kind of see why. It's not scary anymore, it's not very hard hitting. And as charming as the film is, it does have a weak ending. The scenes of witchcraft and the ritual in this at the end are pretty cringe and don't hold up very well. But Joan Fontaine in this really carries the film. She's a joy to watch, wonderful woman in the film, and that's why I wanted to include her on this list. So in at number 8, it's Gwen Mayfield from The Witches. In at number 7, we have Nicholas Medina, played by Vincent Price in The Pit and the Pendulum from 1961. As with the 1950s, I had to get some Vincent Price on this list. He was just absolutely iconic in any film that he made during these times, and would just made any horror film better by being in it. This is a really fun one of his Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. And Pit and the Pendulum, right from the opening scene on the beach where you see the castle looming away in the distance, you know this is going to be a really good gothic horror film. And the locations and the look of this film really achieve that, but then throw Vincent Price in as well as this sort of brooding, sinister character, just adds wonders to an already great film. And then kind of the iconic scene with the swinging pendulum when he goes all maniacal. He really steals the show, and he's just a joy to watch in this movie, as he is any of the movies from around this time. So in at number 7, we have Nicholas Medina from The Pit and the Pendulum. In at number 6, we have Christopher Maitland, played by Peter Cushing in The Skull from 1965. Now in this one, Peter Cushing plays a collector of the occult who happens to acquire the skull of the Marquis de Sade, and he thinks this is great, but it starts to take him down a dark path and sort of change him and who he is. And Peter Cushing, as with Vincent Price, pick any of his movies from this time period and you'll have a great performance and you'll have an iconic character. But the reason I've gone for Maitland from The Skull is because I watched this movie a long time ago when I was young, and this was the first time I'd ever been introduced to the notion of Peter Cushing playing the darker character, because he starts to get sort of, not possessed, but this skull really starts to make him do and say things that are out of character, and yeah, it's having a bad effect on him. And it's actually Christopher Lee who is the voice of reason and the guy that's trying to get him back on the right path. And that at the time for me was just revolutionary, because my first introduction to those two actors were the Dracula films, where they were very much on the opposing sides of good and evil. So to see Peter Cushing in this more antagonistic role, this was before I'd seen the Frankensteins and things like that, was a real eye-opener, and I really enjoyed his performance as a more villainous kind of role, and it's always stuck with me. So in at number 6, we have Christopher Maitland from The Skull. In at number 5, we have Leon Collido, played by Oliver Reed in Curse of the Werewolf from 1961. Hammer Horror's only werewolf movie, and boy did Oliver Reed put in a great performance in this one. Very captivating as the young man struggling with this werewolf affliction, and great casting because, to be frank, Oliver Reed always had a bit of a beastliness about him anyway. So seeing him in this role where he's a werewolf but he's trying to get on top of those werewolf urges, I just think worked very well for him and made for quite an organic werewolf character. And it's just a role in a movie that I've always enjoyed. So in at number 5, we have Leon Collido from Curse of the Werewolf. In at number 4, we have Rasputin, played by Christopher Lee in Rasputin the Mad Monk from 1966. Now, if you want to see a powerhouse Christopher Lee performance, you've got to check out Rasputin. I mean, this is a guy who infiltrated and made his mark on the entire Russian embassy. So you know you're playing a charismatic and ego-driven guy. And Christopher Lee just nails this on a level that I've not seen him play in many other films at all. He is so charismatic in this one. He uses that loud booming voice to command the scenery, chews up any of the scenes that he's in, and he's funny as well. He's really funny in Rasputin. You really do kind of get the sense and get an idea why this guy was able to charm his way into Russian high society, and it's just an absolute joy watching Christopher Lee at his top of his acting prowess in this one. This is a film that I put off watching for years and years because I just didn't like the sound of this kind of Russian set film about a guy that sort of gets in with sort of the Russian government and politicians at the time. It just didn't sound like my kind of thing, but when I watched it, boy was I wrong. It's such an entertaining watch, and yeah, Christopher Lee is just captivating in this role. I highly recommend checking it out. So in at number 4, we have Rasputin from Rasputin the Mad Monk. In at number 3, we have Ben, played by Dwayne Jones in Night of the Living Dead from 1968. Our iconic, stoic leader that's trying to get him and everyone to safety during the Night of the Living Dead. And Ben's always kind of come across to me as being one of the very first final guy / final girl characters. The one that you're rooting for, the one that's getting through the film and you're just hoping that they make it to safety and defeat the monster or the creature. And we see him do everything from fighting the living dead to sort of like strategizing and boarding up the house, and even dealing with unruly characters that are sort of questioning his leadership and that kind of thing. And then the ending to this movie, I'm sure everyone knows it by now. It's such a kicker of an ending, so depressing, but it kind of just shows you how much Ben has come to mean to us over the course of the film, and to see what happens to him happen is just devastating. But yeah, so in at number 3, we have Ben from Night of the Living Dead. In at number 2, we have the Duke de Richelieu, played by Christopher Lee in The Devil Rides Out in 1968. I've said it before, The Devil Rides Out, Hammer Horror's finest hour, the best film that they did, and Christopher Lee is just amazing in this film. He has his usual commanding presence, he totally kicks ass in this one, but he's fighting for good. He's the expert of the occult that is doing battle against the devil and all of his dark forces. And Christopher Lee just leads the way, leads the characters through the film, and you just think if anyone can beat the forces of darkness, it is Christopher Lee as de Richelieu in The Devil Rides Out. He's just absolutely fantastic. I could have thrown in Charles Gray as well, who is one of the most exquisitely charming villains you'll ever see in a film. But The Devil Rides Out, it's one of the finest examples of British horror. Classic, charming. It looks great apart from some of the weak special effects at the end. It is just an absolute pleasure to watch this film. And Christopher Lee is just like, oh my goodness, he is amazing in this one. So in at number 2, we have Duke de Richelieu from The Devil Rides Out. And in at number 1, the greatest horror character from the 1960s is Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins in Psycho from 1960. I mean, was there any doubt? This is one of the most iconic characters in cinema, full stop, not just 1960s horror films. Anthony Perkins' Norman Bates is pretty much the poster boy for the start of modern horror and horror films coming out of the Gothic castles and the Carpathian mountains, and the antagonist no longer being the vampire or the werewolf or creatures of folklore. It was the mild-mannered, good-looking, charming boy next door that was the source of evil and committing unspeakable crimes, which is a really terrifying thought. And so yeah, this really sort of put horror movies into modern day America, into a domestic setting, and changed the landscape of cinema forever. And Anthony Perkins is just absolutely wonderful as Norman Bates. He gets that character. Credit to him for going down the more sort of mild-mannered, innocent route. He doesn't try to be sinister or anything like that. He really does kind of nail that character and making the twist in that movie all the more shocking. So yeah, totally iconic character, great movie. The best horror character from the 1960s at number one, Norman Bates from Psycho. So there we go, guys. That is my top 10 best horror characters from the 1960s. Let me know what you think about that, if you agree or not. It's an interesting decade, so I'd love to know what your top 10 characters would be. So stay tuned for next episode where we go into the 1970s, really starting to get good when we get to this decade. So stick around for that. So thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more videos.